Good morning. Welcome to Philosophy Live. Do you ever feel overwhelmed by feeling sorry for someone else, maybe someone even you're caring for? And today we're going to be looking at the difference between empathy or sympathy and compassion. So welcome to Philosophy Live. My name is Christine Lambie. I'm a student and a tutor in the School of Philosophy and Economic Science. Now, we can take questions from viewers today, so if you have a question, put it in the chat box. As I said, we've got a guest speaker, Dr. Craig Hassad. We've had Craig before. He's from Melbourne, Australia. Craig originally trained as a medical doctor and now is a leading expert in the field of mindfulness. He has years of experience teaching at tertiary level, as well as research and clinical interests in mind-body medicine, lifestyle medicine, integrative medicine. And Craig has been studying philosophy in Melbourne for many years. So let me bring in Craig. Good morning, or I should say good evening.
Yes, good evening. It's nice to be with you.
Yeah, thank you. So let's start with what I said, emotional burnout, feeling overwhelmed, feeling sorry for someone. What actually is that? Can you fill us in a little bit on that?
Well, we have this natural tendency to feel for others. We couldn't really be a social creature without it. And so when we're in the presence of somebody who's experiencing distress, we often mirror that distress ourselves, sometimes called empathic distress or vicarious stress. If we experience that once and, after a couple of minutes, the situation's over, then things return back to normal and all's well. But if we're around that a lot, if in our work or in our home situation or works, a carer, for example, during COVID, a lot of health professionals were experiencing this, that continuous empathic distress leads to a kind of a burnout. So, so carer fatigue, carer burnout. We can perhaps talk a little bit more about it shortly, but the idea of compassion burnout is probably a misnomer. It's not compassion that burns us out. It's that empathic distress.
So you're making a distinction here between empathy and compassion. Could you fill that out a little bit more? What is the difference? Maybe I'll just show this slide. Let's have that. Yeah.
So what you can see here on the left, this is one of the studies by a team that very interested in mindfulness. They're neuroscientists and also looking at things like compassion. And the scan on the left, you can see the amygdala is circled. Now, the amygdala is the little area of the brain that activates the fight or flight response. So if you're walking through the forest and out comes a tiger, you want your amygdala to fire off to tell you to get out of danger and to rev your engine and so on. But this is the scan of people's brains who are listening to the sounds of somebody in distress. So they're just hearing a sound, and this is what's going on in their brain. So the amygdala is actually firing off as the person's experiencing a fight or flight response. And what's interesting is that when people, like when they're looking at, say, novice meditators and then more experienced meditators, the more experienced meditators actually have more response. Their brains are more responsive in these areas. But the stress response areas don't light up in the way that they do for people who are experiencing empathic distress. So it's like if we're experiencing pain, our stress circuits will tend to activate. But the person who's observing that, who's experiencing empathy and then steps from empathy into empathic distress, they'll have the same stress and pain circuits firing off in their own mind.
Right. And then the little box on the right with the green arrow is a very different scan. Can you say something about that?
Yeah, so for compassion, very different areas of the brain activate. So areas of the brain associated with positive emotions and love and consideration, maternal care. So very different areas of the brain activate, but the areas of the brain associated with the negative emotions don't. And so it's a very different neurological footprint, if you like.
Mm.
And so one of the first studies that was looking at this, there's a French monk by the name of Mathieu Ricard. And so he was the translator for the Dalai Lama whenever the Dalai Lama was traveling in French countries. And so he was, I think the Dalai Lama gave him instructions, let's see what's going on in the brain during meditation in different states. So he was one of the first ones who was ever studied in this way. And they instructed him to, in a sense, meditate on empathy, people in distress, but not compassion. Don't step into compassion, just stay with the distress. And so they were getting that sort of pattern of brain activation. And they said, "Oh, take a break for a few minutes." And when they were looking at the brain scans in that break for the few minutes, all of a sudden, totally different networks started activating. They said, "What did you do then?" He said, "Oh, in the break, I started just meditating as he had done for a long time on compassion." And that was the first time they recognized that compassion had a completely different footprint, as it were, in the brain compared to empathy.
That's interesting. So if we think about maybe a carer or a medical professional, they're faced with someone in distress, and what are the options? How let's just have another look at this slide.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, anybody facing the suffering of another. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so confronted by the suffering of another, empathy arises, and empathy is not wrong. It's not like empathy is bad. It's a very natural response. It's like that reflector, like that mirror in the heart, as it were. But what happens is it's like that sort of next step. So if we step into empathic distress or vicarious stress, one of the things that happens, particular attentional gateways in the brain, the attention goes off the person with the stress and the attention turns in to oneself. We become fixated on our own distress. And so that's not necessarily helpful. And the areas of the brain activated with fight or flight switch on. So we want to avoid, we want to cut out. What some people do in order to cope with that level of distress is to become cold or removed or clinical in a sort of very cut off kind of way, as a sort of a way of protecting oneself.
Yeah.
What happens with compassion is quite different. The empathy arises, but the attention, there's an ability to feel comfortable with the distress. There's an openness to the situation. It is what it is. There's an ability to turn towards and to engage with the situation. If you like, to remain mindful, aware, accepting, open. The attention stays with the person who's experiencing the distress, but all sorts of areas of the brain that the stress circuits don't light up that make one want to fly, but the areas of the brain associated with compassion, with care, with love, with support, and also areas of the brain associated with motivation and action. So a really important part of a compassionate response is not just having a feeling of resonance with the person, but a complete readiness to do whatever one can to help that person. The helping behavior when we're experiencing empathic distress, there can be helping behavior, but mostly it's about, I've got to fix you so I can feel all right again, rather than exactly what does this person need? How can I help? And the help, it might be that, you can do something to, hold the limb, to stop the bleeding, whatever. Or it might just be you're there and just with providing that sort of support, that sort of loving care, at the bedside with the person, just to be with them.
Yeah, so I can see how we would get exhausted from empathy, feeling too involved with another person's distress.
If we don't activate that compassionate response.
Yes.
Because the interesting thing is that with compassion, we now know that there's greater resilience. Stress is not activated. There's more courage. There's more. It's associated with a whole range of positive emotions as well. So it's the kind of thing that people can do remarkable things when they experience compassion, rather than the sort of aversive response.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it really doesn't have the adverse effect that empathy has. It's obviously a completely different wiring from what you're saying.
Yes, it doesn't have that negative effect that empathic distress has, and so that's the kind of reason why people say, well, look, there is no such thing as compassion fatigue or compassion burnout. It doesn't happen with compassion.
So if we went to a really simple example, you read the news or you see the news, it's even more acute, I think, when you see the pictures or the video and something is distressing and you feel very sorry and there's not much you can do. What would you say about that kind of situation?
Well, a lot of people say, don't watch the news, can't watch the news these days. I suppose that's one response.
Yeah.
If we are going to receive the news and see these things, which it's very natural to feel moved when seeing other people suffering. Now, we may not be able to do something about what's happening on the other side of the world, in some other part of the world, but that compassionate response may be better directed somewhere locally, doing something to support, something to help in our own community. And so that energy can be very well channeled to, okay, well, where can I act? Where am I able to respond? What is my responsibility? What's in front of me? And to respond to that. I think one of the things that, and to some extent we can see that when there's that distress and fight or flight is activated and it's not being well processed, either leads to this fleeing or sometimes to a kind of a fight response, aggression, and neither of which is really helpful or going to serve the needs of the situation.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I believe, this is a huge impact during COVID on all the medical professionals. And I think you've developed a course on this for medical students. Would you like to say something about that?
Yes, well, it was, there were so many calls, as it were, from health professionals, first responders, ambulance drivers, nurses, doctors, that there was a clear need for compassion training. And there have been various compassion trainings and so on around the world. We developed one to particularly meet the needs of our own healthcare community. And so this was being found to be, as you know, it's an online self-paced course, but with plenty of support along the way, etc. And we found it to be tremendously helpful for the health professionals who were doing it. And the faculty said, well, look, this is the kind of training that our healthcare students need as well. So it was brought into the training of medical students as well. So a core part of their curriculum. So in their final year, before they're unleashed on the world, as it were, one of the things they do is their essential modules in their final year is this course in compassion training, which has been tremendously well received by the students. And and now it's being used in medical school in the UK as well.
So that's obviously spreading around. It's
yes, yeah. So
nice if it was, if I may say, viral.
I'm not sure I've ever gone viral, but certainly it's spread in a good way.
Yeah. I'll just say again, we may have time for a question for our speaker. So if you have a question, put it in the chat box. But I'll just ask you one more thing. In a very simple way, if somebody is watching this and they are facing a demanding situation, or caring for a relative which they find challenging, can you just break that down into bite-sized pieces? How would they approach that? What's the best way to approach that?
Well, if we're in a situation and we do it, somebody's suffering, for example, reacting. If we're just on automatic pilot, then we get into a whole cycle of reaction, and etc. So one of the really useful things about practicing things like the exercise that bring us to an awareness of the present moment, the body, and so on, is that when we're in a situation like that, all of a sudden there's a moment of awareness. It's like, oh, all of a sudden the perspective of the observer comes into the situation. It's like, oh, that's interesting. So there's an ability to start to observe the reaction, to observe the fight or flight, to observe the aversive sort of response. That gives us the opportunity to remember just to be open. The present moment is what it is, to learn to be still and just aware, to remember something like, oh, and notice where the attention's going, and to reconnect the attention with the person, to get very curious, to ask, just simply, what can one do? So there's not just on a mental level, but on an emotional level, and very importantly on an attentional level, to take that conscious step from empathy into compassion rather than empathic distress. And the thing is that there's an openness, an open-hearted readiness to respond to the situation. I can remember very formative experiences for myself as a junior doctor before I learned anything about this, but I had realized going into an emergency situation, the best thing you can do is just be present and meet the situation in the moment. And just trust your responses in that moment, but to be open and to be ready for it, rather than walking down the corridor to go up to the psychiatric unit and, there's a patient in distress up there and your mind is saying, I don't want to be here. I wish I wasn't here. What am I anticipating? What am I going to, what's it going to be like? It's just like meet it when it's there, but to be ready to step into it. So I kind of, I suppose I was lucky in a kind of a way that intuitively sort of had a few moments where I kind of learned a few things like this for myself, and now understand them perhaps in a better way.
I'm just going to take a question here from William Wooldridge in South Africa. So the ultimate cause of distress and other emotions is not the mechanism, brain, body, etc., but rather our state of being, which is reflected through the mechanism. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, well, to quote Marsilio Ficino, the body's the shadow of the soul. And yes, so what's going on in the mind? The body will very much reflect that. And so, yes, and I think the most essential thing is to bring the awareness into the moment, bring to be present. Because that opens up the window of opportunity to make a conscious, discerning choice. Not just reason has a chance to operate, but also the heart has a chance to respond. And so, yes, the state of being that we bring to a situation like that is really the transformational factor.
Yeah. I can see... I'll just mention it. Charmaine Kendall is doing a lot of caring at the moment. She just says very useful, which is just nice to see. I think you have a quote from the Dalai Lama about compassion. We can all cultivate more compassion, something like that.
Well, there's one quote from the Dalai Lama. If you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. So I think there was no escape.
That is a good note to end on. Thank you so much, Craig. Thank you for joining us and sharing your wisdom.
It's been a pleasure.
And thank you for watching. This has been extremely interesting. I hope it's useful. I hope it helps with this kind of empathy burnout. So have compassion. That's, I think, the message of today. If you've enjoyed this video, please like it and share it. Follow us on Facebook and definitely subscribe on YouTube, and join us again on Friday, next Friday, for another Philosophy Live. Thank you so much. Bye for now.